Senator,
Hello, how
hey,
are you?
sorry about that. We have link issues.
It's all good. It's all good. I'm on my phone and my name is Adam apparently,
I,
but
I
I
got
feel
you.
like when people know I'm me.
No, you're good. Well, thanks so much for taking your time to be with us, with our clients and some guests. And we know you're busy, getting right into the thick of things here. So we'll just kind of jump right on in if that's okay.
That is okay.
I wanted to just, I mean, you really don't need any introduction, but I really just want to do a little bit of a formal introduction for those that don't know you as well. I mean, with all your accomplishments, of course, raised right here in Lansing, and you've been involved in public service, county and state for over 20 years with so many accomplishments and so many trails you've blazed. First, you were the youngest Black woman to serve on the county commission in the United States. And then you, of course, ended up chairing and vice chair of the Enum County Board of Commissioners. You were the first Black woman from Mid-Michigan to serve in the House and the Senate. Of course, where you took on many leadership roles. And then, of course, as a Michigan senator, you became the first Black woman to chair the Senate Appropriations Committee. So you continue to be such an important figure at our Capitol, an important leader in our state. And of course, you are a longtime leader in standing up for equality and those who are most vulnerable in our state. And we all appreciate and value that so much. So with that, let's just jump on in. Obviously, as chair of the Senate Appropriations Committee, um, like I mentioned, you're getting in the thick of things. Of course, CREC happened already on January 10th, the Consensus Revenue Estimating Conference. And the governor presented her budget recommendation to you and your counterpart on February the 5th. And so now here we are in March. So can you give us kind of just an update on how's it going and what's the latest?
Yeah, it has been a very different year, as I'll say. There's so many different dynamics that are in play here. We now are in divided government. So in the first 2 years that I've chaired the Senate Appropriations Committee, we've had a Democratic trifecta, which didn't make things much easier, but there were some values and issues that we had for the most part, consensus on. But we're now in divided government. The House is now led by the Republicans, and it just adds a layer of more negotiations. We see some of the budget process playing out in a more public way than what we've seen in the last few years. I think I got an update on close a book supplemental. I got an official update via Twitter or X, in which Speaker Hall was letting folks know that he wasn't necessarily interested in closing the books. And Dave, you remember, the politics behind a close a book supplemental, but also the real implications in terms of our credit rating and making sure that, all of the folks who need to see that Michigan is serious about its financial standing, that is actually done by things like closing the state's books from the previous year, our ability to receive federal funding and clean up boilerplate language that may have been missed in the last budget. I'm adding that as an example of how this year's budget process, which is political, but a lot of it very technical and just about getting in a room and figuring out where we want to prioritize limited state funds. We're going to see that process play out in a more public way. We're already seeing it. We're going to continue to see it. Another thing that is different this year that we're gearing up for is my counterparts in the House are signaling that they are not interested in getting the budget done before July 1. Now, this is something, and you remember this well, again, that we have had under both the Republican and Democratic leadership an understanding that getting the budget done before July 1 is really important to a number of sectors, education in particular, but also local governments have come to rely upon us to let them know what is coming from the state in terms of school funding, revenue sharing, et cetera, before July 1. So we're monitoring what that looks like in a world in which the governor and the Senate have both decided that we want to continue to press forward in that lane in order to give more predictability to local governments and school districts. But the House is threatening to blow past that deadline. And so we're monitoring what that actually looks like.
Yeah.
And then the last piece I'll add about this year being different is some of the action at the federal level. We have seen now the US House of Representatives passing a budget with some substantial cuts related to DHHS, Medicaid, Medicare payments, some big components of our state's budget that rely on federal funding in order for us to, you mentioned in my bio, looking out for vulnerable populations. Seniors, kids, individuals with different abilities will all be impacted if the federal cuts sustain, and means that we need to fill in the gaps at the state level with, again, funding that has been drastically decreased. As a reminder, we have had record revenues due to one-time COVID dollars. And so I think many of the clients on the call maybe have received one-time investments for capital improvement projects, programming dollars. Those really have been one-time funding opportunities from the federal government that, you know, are no longer available in the scale that they have been. But again, we are monitoring the actions at the federal level, knowing that we may have to shift priorities in real time. So that's kind of some of the plates that we're spinning right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For
So
sure.
anyway, go ahead, keep
Yeah.
asking questions.
Yeah. So, you mentioned the change in the House with new leadership. Of course, there's a new chair over there in Rep. Bolin. So just curious about, I was in your shoes, years ago, and of course it's much different now, but the relationship between the three of you, the governor's budget director, the House chair, and the Senate chair, is really important in getting this process done. Of course, and it's always difficult, and there's a lot of personalities and a lot of pushing and pulling, but how do you develop that relationship, or how have you started to develop that relationship with a new chair in the House who's from a different party?
Yeah. So the good thing about being around a while, and the fact that you said 20 years at different levels of government, is weird to hear. But the last couple of years that I've been in the House and the Senate, you build relationships with both sides of the aisle. When divided government became a reality for us, it didn't scare me because I spent the first 4 years of my legislative career still getting things done, but in the minority party. And so Chair Bolin and I came into the legislature together. She comes from local government in the same way I come from local government. And she has also served on appropriations for a number of years, which helps. Shockingly,
sure.
which helps. And so when we talk about the impact of not closing the books or not doing the budget before July 1, it is encouraging to have someone who has real experience at the local level and as an appropriator that understands what those dynamics actually means. She is a serious policymaker and someone who, we can always just hope that people, yes, we all have to do the politics, but I believe that Chair Bolin is someone who can get behind closed doors and understands the nitty gritty. When you're talking about cutting billions of dollars for a roads plan, I think at some point folks will kind of look up and realize, wait a minute, where's the money going to come from?
Right.
Who's going to be impacted by those cuts? So I'm encouraged that I have a legislative partner in the other chamber that actually understands the functions of the job. And that makes things so much easier, even if you have different values and different approaches to the work. So I'm excited to work with her.
Yeah. She has a great personality for this work, and I can just see the two of you gelling very nicely.
Yeah.
You move down the road.
I agree.
So talk to us a little bit about, your priorities on the Senate Democrat side in the budget process? And as you know, a lot of us on this call are kind of inside baseball people, so we understand the process, you know, where the House will have kind of their proposal and the Senate will have their proposal. And the governor's already presented hers, but you know, to be a little siloed in the initially, and then we'll all have to get reconciled and come together. But how do you see early on, or what do you see early on as some of the Senate Democrat priorities in the budget?
Yeah. You know, this is going to sound very broad, but we want to put as much money back into the pockets of Michiganders as possible. Folks feel uncertain right now. Again, we talk about the impact of the federal budget and what that means here locally. We have to make sure that people still have a social safety net here in the state of Michigan, that we're lowering costs for Michiganders that are working, you know, working families, but also at the same time looking out for our most vulnerable people. So that could look like a number of things, but lowering costs and making sure that more money gets back in people's pockets is our North Star goal. Once you approach things with that lens, some decisions become easier. It becomes easier when you're deciding whether to, you know, pour in significant amounts of money into maybe investments that maybe were nice to do when we had a surplus, but maybe we can no longer afford in this new reality. So we're going to lean into affordability. We are not shy about looking at ways that we can be more transparent in our processes. We have led the charge in making sure that our enhancement grants and earmarks have a legislative sponsor for the first time in the history of this institution. The last few years, those sponsors, those grants have had a representative or a senator's name behind it. And I think that that has been a really big first step in good governance. So whether the House Republicans or the governor's team wants to build upon the work that we've done in terms of transparency, we welcome that as well. So
Yeah, great. Speaking, you mentioned the earmarks and you know, the kind of legislative priorities or enhancement grants that have been in the budget for many years now, and some of them have come under scrutiny and criticized in the last year or two, but the House has implemented, as you know, kind of a new process for those, where it's going to be kind of a public domain, where any project that wants to be considered for state funding has to be kind of submitted, and then it'll be on a public domain where the public can come and look and see what legislators are advocating for. I haven't heard if the Senate is doing anything similar, but how do you see that getting reconciled? You know, the House, I think, is pretty public about it. If there's not something on their list that's, you know, shown to the public in a transparent way, they don't want it to be considered as part of the budget ultimately. But I guess, how do you see that playing out, and if the Senate may adopt similar kind of public transparency rules with those grants?
yeah, I think that the systems that we've already put in place are pretty darn transparent. Again, there's always room for us to grow and build. At this time, we're not interested in adopting wholesale the Republican proposal and how they are like building a portal and those components. We don't see that as something that we will be adopting wholesale, but we're open to that conversation. Again, I think that there's always room to make sure that any state funding, any taxpayer funded programs, initiatives are, you know, reviewed by the public. That is always the North Star goal. But I think that there is multiple ways to do that. So, you know, we're excited to see what comes next in the process.
Yeah, great. Shifting gears a little bit, but of course, budget related, is road funding. Of course, a lot of talk in town about road funding. So just want to get your perspective on it. I mean, there's a lot of implications both on the budget side and policy side. And, you know, the governor's kind of had her proposal out as of recent, and the House has a proposal out there, and the Senate has, I think, bits and pieces, but maybe not a comprehensive one yet. So talk to me a little bit about the Senate road funding plan and how you see that kind of playing alongside and within the budget process.
Yeah. Well, one, I think for context, you know, obviously the Senate is concerned about the condition of our roads. We have been for the last umpteen years, probably my entire life. We have been
Right.
talking about addressing road funding. And at the same time, our caucus is also concerned about all the other things that need to be addressed. You know, I mentioned earlier the social safety net for people. Can't eat a road doesn't educate your kids. A road doesn't come and make sure that you are safe in your home when you have an intruder at 2 a.m. And so when we're looking at education, healthcare, the safety of our communities, roads are a part of that, but it's only one balance sheet. And so ultimately, you have multiple proposals that doesn't quite get to the reality of our financial situation. We cannot cut our way into a $3 to $4 billion road solution. It's impossible to do without robbing our citizens of what they expect and deserve. We also cannot overtax every industry, every entity, every organization and individual in exchange for the rest of the big human priorities that we have. So you know how the game is played. We will likely land somewhere in the middle, in which we, yes, do need additional revenue to solve these issues, but we also don't want to, you know, fix the roads on the backs of everyday Michiganders. The other thing that I just have not seen and heard from any of the proposals was a real conversation around transit. It is something that, you know, whether you live in very rural areas of our state, our highly concentrated urban areas, making sure that folks who are unable or do not desire to drive a car still have options to get to work and to recreation. And so I believe that a proposal that we pull forward would also need to contemplate how to invest dollars for transit funding as well. So what you will likely see out of the Senate is us being, you know, the compromise in the room that pulls different elements of all the pieces together to come up with something that can get through both caucuses and to the governor's desk. Roads are a part of the solution that everyone, I think, is excited to bring forward this year. But whatever that looks like, it cannot rob us of the social safety net for our people. It just, I don't think this is the time in which even the public would stand for that.
Yeah. Yeah, so speaking of taxes, the governor has several kind of tax proposals for, you know, revenue.
Yeah.
I think there's a proposal to increase the corporate income tax. There's a additional tax on marijuana and vaping products and things like that. Just curious your perspective on some of those proposals.
Yeah, listen, they're ideas, right? I mean, I think that having a cursory look of what are some industries, what are some individual taxes that maybe when we think about shared sacrifice, that we're putting all of those options on the table. But ultimately, I think it's going to be about us getting in a room and figure out what is going to actually get us to a number that actually get us to solving this crisis. If we're just nipping at the edges, at some point we have to decide if it's worth it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, all part of the process and discussions going forward, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You alluded to earlier about some of the challenges from the federal government and things we're hearing and seeing. Of course, we know that a big chunk of the state budget is federal funds. It was 40% at one point. Maybe it's right in that ballpark. So how concerned are you about what you're hearing from DC, and is there work being done kind of to, you know, have some backup plans? Maybe, obviously the state has a big fund balance as well. You know, that under your leadership and others, you know, you were there, were able to put money aside for maybe a crisis situation like this or something like that. So can you talk to us a little bit about, you know, what you're hearing from the federal government on revenues, how that might impact the state, and, you know, what possibly can you and the other budget leaders do to protect Michigan from potential cuts in this area?
Yeah. It's the thing that keeps us up at night, Dave. I mean, you know, we have prepared, we haven't left the state's, you know, coffers dry. This has been multiple years of work. under Republican and Democratic leadership to make sure we have set aside rainy day funds and not spent to the penny. But we are nervous. I mean, you remember the biggest budget we have is the DHHS budget in the state of Michigan. This is where we literally take care of people. This is foster youth and senior citizens and vulnerable populations who, without these safeguards, people would die. People would die from everything from pre-existing conditions, healthcare scares, dental assistance that oftentimes what's happening, in your teeth can impact your entire body. There is a role we have felt collectively, both sides of the aisle, that government needs to play in order to make sure people are healthy, that our people have the tools they need to survive. And so the cuts that we're seeing that are potentially coming down will have lasting impact. And we don't have enough money to fill the gaps. We just don't. And do a big roads plan and invest billions in economic development. And, so again, at some point, the nerds in the room will just tell us it's one balance sheet and you can't invent money. And we're not Congress that can just keep punting and not do balanced budgets and print money. And we have a responsibility to get a balanced budget done by July 1. And to do so, we have to be mindful of what's happening at the federal level. So I'm nervous. I'm nervous, and I don't want us to put all our eggs in one or two big shiny baskets and then realize that these cuts from the federal level might become real. The other thing I'll say is we want to acknowledge the cuts that have already manifested. There are Social Security offices that have closed, federal employees in our state that have been terminated. There have been plenty of impacts that have already taken place. Clinical trials at our higher education institutions, again, federal branches that are closing. These things are already happening, and they do have an impact on how we're able to approach government. I have talked to Senator Slotkin on a weekly basis. We are trying to make sure that we're getting accurate information to people. I was reading a report around Social Security payments and that there might be some delays or interruption because of some of the actions that are happening at the federal level. Most of our people live paycheck to paycheck, regardless of, what we're doing. Can you imagine just a week delay in your Social Security and what that would do for so many senior citizens in the state? So there are some direct impacts on the state's budget. There's also just a role that our office has to play in creating documents and ways that people understand what's fact and fiction, because people are really confused right now.
Yeah, there's a lot of nervousness about it for sure. So good luck with that. Hopefully it doesn't impact the process in a great way, in a big way. But well, just shifting gears, and we'll wrap up here soon and get you on with your day. But of course, the budget and appropriations job is big and it's statewide, but you're also a senator for Mid-Michigan with constituents and a lot of other probably projects and initiatives and things. So I know you've been a leader on the citizens access to credit issue and others. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your policy work that you're doing and your policy priorities. I know it's probably hard to even fathom other work with the budget work going on now, but if you can talk a little bit about some of your policy priorities as well as you're working as a state senator.
Yeah. So many things that we try to do. I try to be a generalist. You remember, like Dave, people would be known for being the education person, or they're a fiscal hawk or whatever. Yeah. I've been known for just fighting for regular people to get a little bit better off, right? Just to not fall into traps of, cycles of debt, or, making sure that people can afford to actually get into the middle class. And so we have doubled down on our commitment to affordable and quality housing, both from a financial budget impact, but also creating policies that help people, afford a house or have rental conditions that are conducive to their lifestyle, or that at the end of the day, their housing is safe and affordable. So our portfolio on housing has been pretty robust. We also know that just affordability, so freeing up more money in people's budgets. So whether that's like paying down student loan debt, the governor gave us a nice shout out at last week's State of the State related to medical debt. So something that saddles so many Michiganders and people across the country. And at the same time, you get an unexpected $2,000, bill. She didn't know it was coming. It could take you years to really pay that down and a lot of things on your credit score. So we look for things that, help lift people up and prevent them from going into debt and affording, again, a new home or affording, a new kid, whatever that looks like. So lifting people up from poverty and making sure that we're not allowing them to go into debt is something that's important to us as well. And then finally, we're all things higher education and affording college and skills. So Reconnect, the Achievement Scholarship, things that again make getting a skill and staying in Michigan more affordable. So those are the things we have always worked on and we'll continue to do so.
Awesome. Never a shortage of issues to deal
Yeah.
with.
We
So,
have an amazing team. So, and I know whether it is Christy James, my chief of staff, Andy Solon, our budget director, Remy Gelderloos, who leads our policy work. Between the three of those folks on our team, they're really able to, one, be a good connector to your lobby firm because you all are great partners. You advocate for your clients really, really well. You educate us, you challenge us, and see these priorities through. So we just thank you. But those three on our team are truly some of the best in Lansing. So we
For
try to
sure.
make sure that we're able to juggle all of the balls in one. That's how we do it. Is we
Yeah.
just have like the best team. That's it.
Your staff is great. They're very accessible. And of course, you have the team over at the Senate Fiscal Agency with Catherine Summers and her team.
Yes.
They're amazing people and hard public servants over there as well. So
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
appreciate them as well. Well, Senator, thank you so much for your time. We know you're busy. Thanks for all your leadership. You are truly a role model for so many people, especially our young people in Michigan, to look up to and aspire to. So just keep it up. Good luck with the budget process. We'll just keep in touch as we move forward.
Thank you again for everything. And thanks everyone for joining this afternoon.
All right. Take care. Have a great week.
Thank you. You too.